Israel, despite knowing this, did not stop that bombing campaign. So this was one intention clearly demonstrated, that they wanted children to die in large numbers. They actually say that every child is an enemy. Every child in Gaza is an enemy, and that when a child is born, the child is born as a terrorist. Israeli civil society organizations who are prepared to speak to us, give us information, defying the government of Israel. I use the word defying because Israel specifically instructs its citizens not to interact with this commission. However powerful a country may be, you are answerable in law to international human rights law, and you are held accountable. It is in every country's interest to see that these mechanisms work. So even while we may have trade relations with certain countries, we should be able to draw a line to say, this is something that we will not endorse.
Hello and welcome to The Federal. You're watching Conversations with Nilanjan. The world is in strife. At any point of time over the last couple of years, there have been more than one war which has been ongoing. At the moment, it's very difficult to say which war is going on which there is a ceasefire. It's all very complicated. But from October 2023, a very brutal war had actually started in the Gaza territory. It was launched by the Israeli Defense Forces. Technically, in October last year, a ceasefire was there, but for all practical purposes, the ceasefire is only on paper. It may continue. There could be difference of opinion. Now, last month, the UN Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, which was established 5 years ago in 2021, it came out with a fairly damning report as to how Israel has very selectively targeted children, killing them and maiming them. We will be talking about this very sad report which is there, which is actually an eye-opener, if I can actually say so. Now, joining me on this program is our own very well-known Justice Srinivasan Muralidhar, who has been a jurist of long standing in India, who has been a judge in the High Courts, in the Supreme Court, who's practiced in the Supreme Court, a very eminent judicial person. Last year, towards the end in November 2025, he was appointed as the chair of the UN Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, as I said, which was established, 5 years ago. So welcome to this program, Justice Muralidhar. It's really a delight to speak to you on a subject which is slightly away from the Indian political storm which is currently brewing, but also a very important international landmark. We cannot forget what is happening in the world while being focused on Indian politics. Welcome to this program, Justice Muralidhar.
Thank you, Nilanjan.
This commission, I do remember when you were appointed, it was reported in the Indian papers. I very frankly had paused for a moment. Is there such a commission? I had not heard much about it. I will be very honest. When the report came out, a large number of people with whom I spoke, they said, is there such a commission, and has it been there for a long time? So I think, the first thing which we need, for our viewers is to understand from you.
Yes.
A little bit about the background about this commission, under what framework of the UN has it been formed, and what all has the commission been doing in the period that you have taken charge, and also maybe a bit more on very important reports or work which may have been done preceding you. Please.
Correct. Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. See, under the United Nations framework, you have the Human Rights Council comprising about 62 odd countries. And they are the ones by a resolution who have set up this International Independent Commission of Inquiry on Palestine. When they mean Palestine, they say Occupied Palestinian Territory. including East Jerusalem and Israel. The Palestine issue, that is the conflict in that zone involving Israel, Palestine, and other actors, has been the subject matter of ad hoc commissions earlier. There were two ad hoc commissions on specific instances of incursions in the occupied Palestinian territory. There are also what are called mandate holders, like the special rapporteur. Ms. Francisca Albanese is one such mandate holder. She's the special rapporteur. Then you have other kinds of mechanisms in the UN, like you have working groups, you have independent experts, so on and so forth. Then you have fact-finding missions. So there are various kinds of these bodies. Earlier, when there were zones of conflict, like for instance, there was in Rwanda, there was in Yugoslavia, there was in Cambodia, they formed what are called ad hoc tribunals, because you will have a large number of victims, you will
Okay.
have reparations to effect, and
Okay.
you will have enforcement issues of those orders. So the Security Council sets up these ad hoc tribunals. When
Okay.
it came to this particular zone of conflict, the Human Rights Council felt that instead of having you know ad hoc tribunals, let's have one tribunal which
Permanent.
will have a set mandate and no particular time limit. So what is unique about this commission is it has no specific tenure, but it
Mhm.
is tasked with looking at not only incidents that happen, like for instance the 7th October 2023 incident when
Right.
Hamas took Israeli citizens hostages. It also has to look into root causes. That is from the point of, let's say, the starting point could be 1947, when by a UN resolution, the two-state
Mm.
nation theory was given effect to.
Right.
There was going to be a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. So we are expected to trace back the conflicts from then onwards. So this
Mm.
commission is tasked with all human rights violations, and not just of international humanitarian human rights law, but also international humanitarian law.
Mhm.
For the viewers, international human rights law would include the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It would include
Right.
the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, on economic, social, cultural rights. It would include the Child Rights Convention. It could include the CEDAW conventions. All this form part of what we now know as international human rights law. Then you have international humanitarian law, which includes
Mhm.
all the Geneva Conventions and the protocols under the Geneva Conventions. That is what should be the acceptable conduct of parties involved in hostilities, in war, and what is their obligations. Then you also have obligations of what is called an occupying power. Like Israel is now an occupying power, it is occupying portions of Palestine. What are
Right.
Israel's obligations? That is all part of the international humanitarian law. Then
Right.
the third branch is the international criminal law. We have
Mm.
the Rome Statute since 1998, when many countries, more than 120 countries, have ratified the Rome Statute, which defines the crimes of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. So many countries that have ratified have an obligation under the international criminal law to prosecute people who are guilty of these offenses. So you have three branches of law, and this commission's work, which is basically an investigating commission, this commission's work is expected to feed into these mechanisms.
Okay.
So, which is why it's a different kind of a commission than the other commissions that we have thought of. And it's truly independent in the sense that it's a three-member commission, and it's the members are chosen through a rigorous process. Uh,
Mhm.
there is one member who is continued from 2021 when the commission was
Okay.
first set up. He's Mr. Chris
Yes.
Sidoti, a senior lawyer from Australia. There is Justice Florence Mumba. She's a
Mm.
former judge of the Supreme Court of Zambia. She has
Mm.
earlier served on the International Commission for Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, and she's also served on the Tribunal for Cambodia. So she has vast experience in the UN system. Mr. Sidoti also has vast experience. He's been part of the fact finding mission for Myanmar very recently.
Mm.
And then there is me, who's chairing the commission. I come with more than 4 decades of experience
Yes.
in law. So we are truly independent, coming from three different continents. The Commission's headquarters is in Geneva, but
Mhm.
we operate largely on an online mode because we are not permitted to enter those territories by Israel. We will talk about it very soon.
Yes, we will
But
talk
this is a
about it.
truly, yeah, this is a truly independent international commission. So we are not even bound
Mm.
by by the Security Council or the Human Rights Council that has set us up. We are completely free of any control from these organizations.
Fairly detailed, introduction to the commission and the kind of work which it has been doing, the framework under which it has been set up. Now, when the report came out on the children of Gaza, I was startled by the figures. Your report says that from the 7th of October 2023 till the point of you writing the report, which would have been possibly either the end of May or sometime in the month of June this year, as many as 20,179 deaths had occurred among children, and there were 44,143 children who had been injured. In terms of sheer numbers, this is absolutely, possibly one of the gravest tragedies that has unfolded in front of our eyes. But there has been very little, reportage, I would say, that is, at least as far as Indian papers are concerned. And, some of these reports, of, parts of it, have been that children being shot very specifically in the head and neck. That means the intention of firing at them was to have a fatal count, pellet shots. And then fairly long term, epidemics coming up, polio making a return in Gaza. Would you tell us as to the principal points of your finding?
So one is that in this particular theater of conflict, the intensity sharply increased after 7th October 2023. That was a very tragic incident in which
Yes.
Hamas and its affiliated groups caused extensive, violations of human rights. They took Israeli citizens as hostage. More than 2,000 of them were killed. There was rape, plunder, all kinds of violations. That intensity, therefore, of the airstrikes and of the attacks by Israel as reprisal between 7th October 2023 for a period of 2 years till the so-called peace plan was announced in 7th October 2025. That is the period which we have taken up for studying in this report. We focused on children because we've earlier focused on the 7th October 2023 incident itself. We've also focused on genocide in Gaza. That was an earlier report submitted in September 2025. Just 1 week before this report, which we submitted on 23rd June 2026, we submitted a separate report on non-state actors to the Human Rights Council.
Yes.
Sometime in earlier in March 2025, we submitted a report on sexual and gender-based violence. So there are different themes that this commission works on. So this commission has two kinds of reports. One are called mandated reports, which we submit to the Human Rights Council and to the General Assembly. And then there are thematic reports like the one on children that we are now discussing. The 2 year period was chosen because of the intensity of airstrikes. So once you have intensive airstrikes on a continuous basis using high yield bombs, as a country indulging in this, you should know that, in that population, densely, populated areas, the percentage of children dying will be in larger proportions because they're actually fragile, unable to resist the kind of shelling that takes place. And within the first 2 weeks of that bombing campaign, the number of children dying were very high. And Israel, despite knowing this, did not stop that bombing campaign. So this was one intention clearly demonstrated that they wanted children to die in large numbers. The second, which you already pointed out, specifically targeting the heads and necks of children and the upper torso. They use pellets, which make square-shaped holes, and these are tungsten-dipped pellets, which once it enters the body, spreads through it and destroys the tissues and causes extensive damage to the internal organs, almost certainly resulting in deaths. So we have medical evidence, forensic evidence that tells us that children were deliberate targets. And a child which is breastfeeding is shot through the head using a quadcopter while the mother is spared. A child walking with the parent on the road is killed while the parent is unharmed. So you have very many instances where children were deliberate targets. We've explained in this report that when we talk of genocide, one of the elements of genocide is how you specifically target children. You either prevent childbirth or you forcibly transfer children to other groups. This is another species of that where you use weapons that are specifically targeting children alone and causing extensive fatalities amongst children. So, although we submitted a detailed report on genocide in Gaza in
Hmm.
September 2025, this report further, substantiates our findings in that report that children are deliberately targeted because Israel
So
sees
that
children as the future bearers of the Palestinian identity.
right, right.
So one of the things about genocide is to wipe out, erase an identity of a group, and you do it through many methods, and this is one such method.
That in the future there will be no Palestinians
Palestinian group,
to
correct,
give birth to more Palestinians, so an entire race gets eliminated. That is
correct,
very well
correct.
explained that as to why the children were targeted. I was a bit perplexed as to why they were targeted with such, you know, precision targeting.
And this is
You
part
said
of a deliberate, yeah, it's part of a deliberate plan because it's not mere coincidence that at time of hostilities children will die. Because if you look at the statements made by far right-wing Israeli politicians in the Knesset and in public platforms, they actually say that every child is an enemy. Every child in Gaza is an enemy, and that when a child is born, the child is born as a terrorist. So it is this thinking, this mentality that
that every child is a terrorist.
yes, and that every child is an enemy. So the child does not have to be involved in any hostilities. By barely being born in a Palestinian family, the child becomes an enemy.
Becomes an enemy. That is very unfortunate. Now, you said in your introduction that though you are based in Geneva, you function mainly online, going to any of the sites, be it Israel, be it the West Bank, be it Gaza, be it East Jerusalem, is virtually very difficult, or rather, impossible. How then do you go about investigating these crimes? What are your sources?
So in paras 8 and 10 of our report, we've explained the entire methodology. So before about a few months, let's say 6, 7 months before we start working on the report, we issue a public call for submissions. Anyone, anywhere in the world who has information relevant to the theme that we're working on can send us information. So this way we do get much open source information and we get information from individuals. Then we have Palestinians who have managed to, come away to Jordan, Egypt, and other neighboring countries who are prepared to speak to us. We have
Okay.
Israeli civil society organizations who are prepared to speak to us, give us information, defying the government of Israel. I use the word defying because Israel
Yes,
specifically instructs its citizens not to interact with this commission.
that's right.
Israel itself refuses to interact. Then we have doctors who have gone into Gaza for treating the injured and the dead, and those doctors visiting West Bank and East Jerusalem as well. Those doctors have deposed before the commission. In fact, one of the public hearings we held in Geneva this time, we had 3 doctors depose, and their depositions are available on this commission's website. Then we
Okay.
have journalists, we have lawyers who have represented victims seeking justice. So we have a wide variety of people who have spoken to the commission and given their testimonies. Of course, we have the victims themselves. We've even interviewed children. We've interviewed the parents of children. So we have these first-hand accounts. Then, of course, we have Israel soldiers who have filmed themselves committing some of these acts and put them on social media, or they've spoken to television channels, and those are available in the public domain. They've also made documentaries on the acts of Israeli soldiers. We have referred to one of those documentaries in our report. So we have these various sources, but the commission adopts a rather rigorous technique of testing much of this evidence. So even though we may have an eyewitness testimony, we don't rely only on that as a single source of evidence.
Okay.
We have a cross verification through metadata extraction of electronic evidence. We have geolocational techniques. We have chronolocational techniques. So we confirm our evidence gathered through other multiple sources, and we do not therefore arrive at a finding unless we've carefully sifted through all this. We also check the submissions made to us for bias, because one of the accusations that Israel has mounted against the findings of this commission is that it has relied entirely on what Hamas has given us. And I want to repeat, which I've done earlier as well, that this commission is very careful in accepting any form of information or evidence that Hamas or Hamas affiliated groups may have to offer, because we are aware that this could be tainted or could be biased. So we're
Right.
very careful, and therefore we do not even rely only on media reports. There's thousands of media reports on what's happening in
Right.
Gaza and West Bank, but we don't rely on them, because unless an information is able to be independently verified through other scientific methods, the commission simply will not act on it for returning a finding.
What about, you said that Israel, of course, does not interact with you and the state of Israel. So, what were your efforts at trying to get them to respond to you? And in their absence, how do you go about that?
Yeah. So one is, I issue, as a chair of this commission, I issue what is called in diplomatic circles as a note verbal. It's a formal communication
Right.
addressed to the UN Permanent Mission uh, for Israel. There is no response to it. This is issued much in advance. We ask to interact with them. We say, please give us whatever information you may have. We also ask for permission to visit occupied Palestinian territory, West Bank, East Jerusalem, Israel itself. We invariably don't get any response from them. Then, while the report is in a draft form, it is sent to both the State of Israel and to the Palestinian Authority for their comments. And they're given more than 2-3 weeks time to respond to those findings in draft form. They
Okay.
don't respond to at all. So,
Not at
despite
all.
our efforts, not at all. See, from Israel's point of view, and you would have heard the Israeli ambassador say this in television, Israel
Yes.
has a very deep distrust of the entire UN mechanism, and
Right.
particularly the Human Rights Council. They think it's driven by the Islamic bloc of countries who are out to target Israel. So Israel just discredits the entire UN system. Israel has a Ministry of Diaspora Affairs now with a budget of over 700 million US dollars, where one of the main tasks is to have the counter narrative to discredit whatever the UN mechanisms produce. So this is also very agenda driven from Israel's point of view. So Israel will immediately label all UN mandate holders, including this commission, as biased, as one-sided, as out to somehow get Israel and paint it in negative colors. And it waits for these mandate holders, including us, to submit our findings, and then begins to attack it with an obvious thing saying, "Oh, we were not heard. What kind of a commission is this?" Not telling
Right.
the people that they refuse to participate in the deliberations of this commission. So, which is a bit unfortunate, because this commission is most willing to engage with Israel, to look at the evidence it has, to examine the evidence with the same scientific basis as we have examined every other piece of evidence. And we are very much concerned about the injustices done to Israeli citizens themselves. We have talked about the violence of Hamas. We have produced reports on that. So this commission has no particular
It's not
need.
biased, what you
Yeah,
are
and there's no need
clearly
for this
saying.
commission to,
Yes.
yeah, because none of us, Justice Mumba coming from Zambia, me from India, and Mr. Sudodi from Australia, there's nothing to be gained in falsely accusing Israel or Israeli soldiers. What is also interesting is Israel does not produce any evidence to contradict the findings that we have returned. Israel also does not deny the incriminating evidence that Israeli soldiers have put in the public domain. So it's very telling that with all of this, there is no basis for Israel to simply, brush aside the entire commission's work, which is very painstaking work, as biased and without credibility.
And in your investigations, are you able to identify very specific Israeli defense officers as or personnel? Are you able to identify them? And if they are identifiable, can any action be taken against them in the international under international laws?
Yes. So this commission's report on children has in a specific para, I think it's 365, listed out 11 different battalions, units, and divisions of Israeli Defense Forces, and linked the activities of that particular division to a particular incident of human rights
Okay.
violation against children. So, if any country in which any of these members of the units is found wishes to prosecute such person, that country can request this commission to share the evidence it has. So in
Okay.
international law, we have the phenomenon of domestic courts in individual countries exercising what is called universal jurisdiction. Just to give you an example, if Australia is a signatory to the Child Rights Convention and an Australian national has served on the Israeli Defense Forces that has indulged in these forms of violations, war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity, that person, when he returns to Australia, can be investigated and then prosecuted by the Australian government for violations of these human rights laws. So that is called exercised by domestic court in Australia of universal jurisdiction. So that is already begun. There are some countries in which proceedings have been initiated against the members of these defense forces that I'm talking about. So that this is a positive development in one sense of enforcing accountability, not just against Israeli soldiers, but other nationals, like over 13,000 American nationals are serving on the Israeli Defense Forces, over 6,000 French, German. So there are 17 countries whose nationals are serving on the Israeli Defense Forces.
Right.
And those countries have a responsibility in international law because they are ratifying members to many of these conventions. For they are expected to prosecute such people for these crimes.
And have these countries or other countries also, acted as they are expected to, or has there been total
We'll
silence
have,
and
yeah, we'll have to. No,
non-action
it's
from?
not. No, it's not total silence. Some of the main players are, of course, completely, complicit in all of this. But there are individual countries that have reached out to this commission for sharing evidence with them, with an intention to prosecute such persons. So that is
You
a
know,
positive development.
when
And
you
then I'm
were
sorry,
talking,
I'm sorry. I
please,
have to
please,
add.
please, please.
See, South Africa has brought a case against Israel before the International Court of Justice, and
Okay,
this commission's findings are feeding into those proceedings. Then there is a proceedings initiated in the International Criminal Court, and
okay,
warrants have been issued for the arrest of Mr. Netanyahu and others. So both these international judicial bodies are drawing on the evidence that we have gathered. Our evidence gathering protocols are completely aligned with these two bodies, so they find it easy to use our evidence. But having said that, since we are an investigating body, it's very much possible that, when they further investigate, they could come to different conclusions depending on the kind of evidence that they are able to work on
they are
and to
able
test
to
in,
get
and they will test this evidence in the judicial proceedings there.
When you were talking about the Israeli state, spreading their version of what has actually happened, I was reminded that, in the last few years, India and Indians have also had been witness and experienced their share of propaganda by the state that we have seen. Now, talking about India, how do you assess India's position vis-a-vis the Israel offensive after the Hamas attack, and over the last 2.5, 3 years, what has been the stance of the government of India and of the people of India?
So I think it works at different levels. What should be India's stance? One can perfectly understand Israel's connections with India at the level of trade or defense cooperation. We know for a fact that India exports small arms to Israel, but India also has responsibilities in international law. See, it is in India's interest that these mechanisms, whether it's International Court of Justice or other mechanisms of the UN, work effectively because India itself engages with these mechanisms. I've mentioned this earlier when Kulbhushan Jadhav was denied a fair trial in Pakistan.
Right,
We approached the International Court of Justice to have the death sentence awarded to him set aside, and we
right.
succeeded in that. And fresh trial was ordered. So we need these ICJ and other mechanisms to work properly. We have to realize that by being treaty parties to all these conventions, there is an expectation that however powerful a country may be, you are answerable in law to international human rights law and you're held accountable. It is in every country's interest to see that these mechanisms work. So even while we may have trade relations with certain countries, we should be able to draw a line to say, this is something that we will not endorse. This is something we will not support. And countries are doing it at a bilateral level or a multilateral level. You have the sanctions regime. So India is definitely not away or apart from these international mechanisms. They're very much part of it. And being
Right.
the kind of country with a history of being an important player in the international arena, it should be in India's interest to see that no country is allowed to thumb its nose at the international legal order and try and get away with it. In fact, these mechanisms have been set up only to counter the impunity that certain countries enjoy compared to certain other countries. And this kind of a disparity, India should not support. So it is in India's interest that it ensures that impunity is not enjoyed by any country, however powerful it may be, in the international legal order.
Before you had gone and taken charge of this commission, you had, in your long career, you had studied various facets of Indian politics and society. You had been a fairly keen, observer of the politics of Hindutva in the country. There are political scientists who have talked about the very strange similarities between Zionism and Hindutva. Would you like to comment anything on this particular facet? I know it is stepping aside a bit from your work as the chair of this commission, but this is
Correct.
something which I'd just like to know from you.
No, in fact, this is something that we are expected to study as a commission. We're still in the
Right,
process of doing that because as we take up a theme, we're supposed to study the underlying root causes.
right.
And this is a work in progress. That's why it's not advisable for me at this stage to speak much on this.
But I'm so glad, that you are looking at this, because a lot of work has been done by political scientists, trying to trace the links. And we have come across several references to the open, admiration which the early Hindutva leaders had for, the Nazi regime, for instance. And this has been, in fact, one of the paradoxes, that at that particular time they were fairly supportive of the Nazi regime against the Jews, but later on they became very strong supporters of Zionism that we see. Now, you were also talking about the other report, about the non-state actors, there. Can you tell us a bit
Correct.
about that report also?
Yeah. So what is happening in West Bank is that Israel is carving out properties which actually belong to the Palestinians, and they are being allowed to be settled upon, forcibly occupied by Israeli citizens. And more territory which legitimately should belong to the Palestinian Authority, to the Palestinian state, is being taken away by Israel by forcible means. So we have one provisional order of the International Court of Justice that actually requires Israel to vacate all these properties forcibly occupied. But the opposite is happening. With every passing day, more and more settlers are forcibly occupying and forcibly evicting Palestinians from their lands, from their
Right.
fields, and burning their houses, schools, and other places. So it's a very deliberate action by the so-called non-state actors, which are settlers, but fully supported by the Israeli state by arming them and also giving them other logistic support. They leap the other way when the Israeli citizens are attacking, the settlers are attacking the Palestinians. The other major non-state actor that our report of June 15th, 2026 talks about is Hamas and Hamas affiliated organizations. Now,
Right.
people should understand that in 2007, when an election was held, Hamas got elected to govern
Right.
the Gaza territory, but all that broke apart very soon. And today, you have Hamas and its affiliated organizations actually unleashed a reign of terror in that Gaza
In that
Strip,
region.
which itself is a very small area, relatively small area. So Hamas subjects Palestinians to extreme forms of punishment. It accuses some of the Gazans of collaborating with Israel and subjects them to public executions in the public squares, and children are made to witness it. Children themselves are subjected to severe forms of punishment for very tiny so-called infractions like theft and other things. So Hamas actually subjects Palestinians to a lot of misery, and those violations have been documented by us in that report of 15 June 2026. So we must remember that when we talk of human rights violations, we're not talking of violations only by the state of Israel, but also by the settlers, by Hamas and its affiliated groups. And we're also going to be talking about a Palestinian Authority in a report that we're submitting to the General Assembly in October this year. We will be speaking about the Palestinian Authority as well. So it gets more and more complicated in one sense. It's very complex, what is going on in this region. For instance, within Israel, there are certain dominant classes of Jews who subject the other classes of Jews to discrimination. So this commission's work is cut out for it. There are many, many topics to discuss, many, many issues to discuss. And the more and more one gets into it, it's actually the deeper is the complexity.
But when it comes to your investigations on, say, the Hamas or whether the Palestinian authorities, when it comes out, when your reports are actually quite critical of them and very damning evidence is presented, does not the Israeli state really cheer your report and say that, well,
No,
at
yeah,
least our side is being, also being highlighted by the commission?
yeah, but they would like to discredit the entire work of the commission. So it does not serve their purpose. That if they only feel glad that we are pointing out, they do comment. They see the comments in the social media. Some of them will say that finally the commission is actually, calling out Hamas's violations, but you know, they've always biased against Israel and so on and so forth. So in Israel, from Israel's point of view, it does not serve their purpose to pick up anything that the commission does.
To in any way provide legitimacy to you
Correct,
and the
correct. They're only
commission.
hoping all that changes. There's going to be elections in Israel this October, but it doesn't seem from the spectrum of the political, ideologies that we find in Israel that anyone would really want to, you know, change their attitude towards the United Nations generally and to
And
its
towards
mandate
the
holders. Yeah,
Palestinian people and the
yeah,
Palestinian,
correct,
state
correct,
that would be.
correct,
Uh,
correct.
Thank you, Justice Muralidhar. You have very succinctly
Ah,
presented not just the details of the report, but also much more about the entire problem of Palestinian people and the Palestinian state. Thank you very much.
thank you, Nilanjan.